Hi everyone, welcome back to the Move and Inspire podcast. I am thrilled to be interviewing Caggie Dunlop today. So hello, Caggie.
Hello, how are you?
I'm really good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. I'm surviving the heat. London isn't quite equipped for the heat. No one has aircon, but it's good. You know, it's nice to have some sun.
I know London really cannot deal with it, can it? Like you just want to get out as soon as there's a heat wave. Everyone wants to leave.
Absolutely, because you're in Bali at the moment, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm in Bali, but the temperature is probably about the same. It's about 30 degrees, but obviously we all have aircon and you kind of get used to it as well. Like I'm actually sat here with long trousers and long sleeves because you just get so used to the heat.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm basically wearing nothing.
So I was just thinking back like as to when we actually first got in touch, and I think it was during lockdown last year when you subscribed to my membership, and I reached out to you to say that I was loving your podcast because it was the beginning of lockdown when I started listening to Saturn Returns, and I remember listening to one of the first ones you did, which Shown a Virtue, and I took away so many wonderful insights, but I just remember laughing so much. And it's kind of like I find myself giggling through a lot of your podcasts. And I think that you have this really wonderful way of making things feel really light, even though often the topics you're talking about are like quite heavy and difficult. So I think you strike that balance really well, and it draws me back to the podcast time and time again. So I'm really enjoying it.
I think you've kind of nailed it there in terms of why people connect with it. And that's always been something I think that I've had in my personality. It's like I like going deep on things, but I also always like to be fun. And it's almost like I sense when something's got too serious and then I'll make a joke of it. And I think the nature of these kind of themes that we're exploring, like if you go in too heavy and you keep with that tone, people don't really, they can't enjoy that. You know, not constantly, not weekly. So I think it's about striking that balance.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, you definitely do it very well. I would love for you just to start by telling us a little bit about what a Saturn return is and what kind of happened to you during your Saturn return.
Sure. Well, so your Saturn return is essentially a transit in astrology, which is when Saturn orbits the sky and it returns back to the same point it was when you were born. So that takes about 30 years, 27 to 30 years, hence why it's Saturn return. You if you're lucky, you have 3 of these if you live till 90. And your first one is 27 to 30, and it's known as this kind of cosmic coming of age, this initiation into adulthood. And I think regardless of your interest in astrology, and I think that's why it's connected with people even if don't have an appetite for the esoteric, is that is a transition in life that everyone finds difficult, because your 20s are quite, I don't know, you're allowed to mess up a bit more. I think it's changed a lot now in the generation that's younger than me versus when I grew up in the 20s, but we can get into that. And yeah, it's just quite a difficult period. And I think that no one really discusses it because we are always, when we're young, we say, oh, by the time I'm 30, like, if I'm not married, we'll marry each other, or like this will happen. I have the house and I have all these things. And quite often we don't have all those things together. And we're just grasping really who we truly are. But there's a grief in that, because when we have an understanding of who we are in our authenticity, we also have to say goodbye to a lot of things that we've got used to, whether that's a career, a place, people. And so there's also like a lot of isolation that I think we experience. I definitely went through sort of, I call it like a fertile void, where there's like not a lot going on in terms of, I hadn't found my people, I hadn't found my thing, but I knew who I wasn't. And so I had to kind of go through that terrain, so to speak. So that's kind of what a Saturn return is. And then you have Saturn squares that happen at 7, 14, 21, which again are all quite pivotal moments. And the reason it is so turbulent, or can be, depending on how you've been living, is because Saturn is known to be a bit of a disciplinarian. It brings with it these lessons. It feels like a very tough teacher, but it's definitely there to help you. And I think that's the sort of beauty of hindsight, in when you come out of your Saturn return, as you realize, oh, that was actually for my own good. But at the time you're like, why is this happening to me? So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I hope that explains a little bit. And then to your second point about my own Saturn returns journey, I had just moved to LA. I had broken up with a wonderful boyfriend. I had a lovely boyfriend, and I think my life definitely had a trajectory that I could see. We were living in London. We were pretty much living together, and I just had this kind of niggling feeling of this isn't what I'm supposed to be doing, and this urge to kind of perhaps run away, perhaps find myself, perhaps a little bit of both. And then I moved to LA, and then suddenly this massive shift happened in me where all the coping mechanisms and the way I'd been living my life just weren't working, and the consequences of living that way were getting more and more severe and undeniable. And so I just went on this journey, and through that journey, people came into my life in the most weird and wonderful ways. But I was very lonely during this transit. I didn't entirely know what was going on. I always had a spiritual side to me, but I hadn't found my tribe. I hadn't found the tools or the practices really. But I started to during this point. And, I was introduced to the works of the teachings of Abraham Hicks. That was really quite pivotal, and astrology and all these kind of things. And sobriety was like a huge piece for me, or at least sober curious. And then I guess coming out the other side, I went through, life lessons like we all do. And then coming out the other side, I was like, wow, I really wish I had like a handbook that I could give people for navigating this space. And that's kind of how the podcast was born.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I didn't actually know anything about Saturn returns until I'd got through my Saturn return, and it makes so much sense to me. For me, I had a complete career change. Yeah, and I suppose that's part of it as well. You get more curious. Like, as you said, for me, like I was getting more spiritual. I got into yoga, became a yoga teacher, was doing therapy around this age. But I suppose until you're in that, you don't necessarily know what's
happening,
what's going on.
Yeah. It's not brought into your awareness until, like you say, you're looking for it. You have an appetite for those kind of things. So I think that's kind of it. But it's interesting how many people even though it seems quite niche, there's such relatable themes under the umbrella of that transit, if that makes sense.
Something you talk about a lot in your podcast is like your past relationships. And it's something I've been talking about more and more on my podcast, because I've had quite a big shift in being with someone for 10 years who I married, and then more recently separated and divorced. And I really realized the more I do open up about this, and I'm only just starting to open up about it, the more people are really intrigued to learn and understand more. Because for me, it was a massive shift in the sense that I actually moved to Bali. So in terms for you, what do you think has been like the biggest change you've seen over the last few years, or even over the last few relationships, in terms of like you learning more about yourself, your Saturn return, becoming more spiritual, like, the kind of lessons you've learned?
Do you mean in relation to relationships?
Yeah.
Or the lessons from relationships, or how I now go into things in a different way, or all the above?
All the above.
Well, yeah, it's definitely something I discuss a lot. I'd say I've always been very curious about how people relate with one another, whether that's in a romantic sense or otherwise. But obviously, I'm a Taurus. I'm twice ruled by Venus. I'm very romantic, and I've probably always given a lot of energy to that, sometimes to my demise. But the episodes that have always done the best have been the ones that are about relationships, whether that's because they are also simultaneously the most raw and real. I think it's because it's something that everyone relates to. Everyone wants to know and needs to know more about, because we aren't taught anything about it. It's something that we all quite fundamentally need to survive and thrive. We are wired for connection, and yet we aren't given any school. There's no schooling around love, intimacy, healthy dependency, what that looks like, conscious partnerships. So we're learning as we go, but not really informing each other necessarily in a healthy way. I actually think sometimes we're just regurgitating bad advice to one another. There's a lot of people actually in that space that I don't believe are making a positive impact on how, like basically giving advice on how to play games and all this kind of stuff. So it's a very interesting theme. It's something that I am so passionate about. As you know, we both share a love of Mark Groves. I think that he is one of the most incredible people. Esther Perel's amazing as well. And in terms of like my own personal journey with it, I'd say my Saturnian breakup, was the real catalyst for so much for me. And I believe every breakup has the opportunity to be that. I think that through the pain that we experience, there's always an opportunity for tremendous growth. And that definitely, it made me suddenly realize, like, okay, I am responsible for myself. And I have a choice here. Like, we can wallow in our own victimhood, or we can step into our power. And really sort of cultivating that sort of personal autonomy was just so transformative for me. And I don't think that would have happened had I not gone through that breakup, because I was very much, I talk about this a lot, but my 20s was so, I'd been quite conditioned, I guess, and a lot of us are, by society, that as women, that we meet a man and we kind of mold ourselves to them. What kind of girlfriend do they want? Do they need? What version of me do I need to be to fit into their life? And in doing so, we often abandon our own path. And I did that many, 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 many times. And I kind of made a bit of a vow not to do that anymore. And I've definitely become a lot more independent. I know what I want, but I haven't figured it all out. And old habits die hard. And sometimes, the self-worth piece is such a key one here. And I think what we have to remember is it doesn't matter how much work we do, those patterns of behavior are always going to rear their head, so much of what we absorb through our parents, through our childhood, it just comes back to the surface. And I think it's about being constantly conscious and aware of those things, of the sort of child within and which one is speaking. Because I think in relationships, we can be super reactive rather than responsive, because it triggers us, it triggers that pain wound or that trauma. So there's just so many interesting dynamics to it, but I kind of have gone off course. I could talk about this in so many different ways. I had a relationship over lockdown that was very, very different from anything I'd ever experienced before. Perhaps I was a little it was too logical. I think sometimes when you do the work, I noticed that some of my friends that are very heavy in this space can almost justify an unhealthy situation because it's medicinal, because it's a teacher. And sometimes I'm like, oh, it just doesn't fucking work, and we can almost torture ourselves being like, this is good because it's challenging me to just rely on myself. I'm like, or they're just unreliable, So I think that was interesting, because I don't think in my 20s I would have ever been in that situation that I was in. And it was definitely we bonded over more spiritual things, but it didn't work out. We were just incompatible. And right now I'm like very content on my own for the first time, perhaps in a long time. And it's always that challenge, isn't it, between sort of being okay with being on your own, but also keeping an open heart.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. Do you know what? It like sparks so many things that I want to ask you about. One thing I want to say is, I listened to your solo episode about breakups, and I think you said Mark Groves said it, but is it if it's hysterical, it's historical?
Yes. Mark
Good.
so many, he's got just so many quote-worthy things. But if it's hysterical, it's historical is the truest thing. But it also takes the awareness to check ourselves, because also the more intensely we feel about someone, the likelihood, the more it's triggering some old wound, and we're going to get fucking hysterical. And then we put it all onto them. We project it onto them. So being able to regulate our nervous system whilst we go into these situations, it's not an easy piece. It's very complex. It requires a lot of energy, a lot of work. But it's really powerful stuff once you start practicing it.
Yeah, and I think calling it out as well for what it is. If you're able to be in a conscious partnership where you're able to say, look, I know that my head's going a little bit crazy right now, but I need to explain where it's going. And then kind of what I do is do what you do in terms of that, find some humor around it. I'm like, I know my head is going absolutely crazy right now, but I just need to explain where it's going, so that almost you can talk it out and have that awareness around it.
Yeah.
Because we're not going to change that overnight. We're going to have these triggers and we're going to have these reactions.
Yeah.
That is normal. It's not like you do the work and then suddenly none of that stuff rears its head. It's like it's still there, but there's the awareness to look at it with a different lens, and also to be open and honest about it.
Absolutely. And Mark always says, it's one thing when we're on our own to be like, oh, I'm great, I've got it all figured out. And then you meet someone, you're like, oh, no, I don't. No, I really do not. But it's like, even talking about it is giving me this kind of feeling in my stomach of when that stuff comes up and you get that overwhelming, emotional, super reactive thing, it feels, and this is a really interesting part, is that it feels often instinctive, like our body's going, something's wrong, we need to run. But it can be a trauma response from something historical that we've experienced that may have been traumatic, and something is reminding us of that and going, shut down, put a wall up, run, whatever it might be. And I think to be able to communicate that with our partners it's really, really tough. And like you say, there's definitely tools and practices and ways that you can go about it, but it requires vulnerability. It requires really separating from our ego and being able to be imperfect, And I think something that I really struggled with, definitely in relationships, is I want to be perfect. And so for me to say, this is bringing up this for me, and this is actually my shit, not you, it's actually really hard for me to do. I'd far rather be like, this is you.
Totally. And also I think as women, we have this fear around being needy, coming across as weak and needy. And so that can stop us so much. And so again, we do this thing of I'm fine on my own. Especially exactly. I think our generation as well, where we're supposed to have it all, the job, the career, the husband, the baby. But yeah, being able to share that vulnerability, as you said, and also being able to share your needs, which actually leads me on really nicely to a point which I definitely never ever thought about sharing what I needed in a relationship ever before. And when I went through my separation, I was like, right, I'm going to work out what I really feel I need. And so I really did some work on writing those things down.
So powerful.
And I wonder, oh, so powerful. I wonder if you have like some non-negotiables, some needs that you wouldn't mind sharing that you look for within a relationship.
Absolutely. I mean, because yeah, that's the thing. It's the non-negotiables, which sounds pretty like you're going in for a tough, being like, this is it, this is how it's going to roll. But you kind of do have to have those fundamental things that you look for. But it's funny because I think we go searching for unconditional love with a scripture of conditions. It's like, and it's only once we're in them, because we don't communicate them before. We're just like, oh, I don't like that, I don't like that. But so to be able to actually, no one takes the time to be like, okay, these are the things, these are like my values, this is what I stand for, this is what I need from a partnership. And I'm going to be gender specific. As women, we're so malleable because we've had to be a lot of the time. But I think that's shifting so much. And it's like a sieving process when you can just be like, these aren't meeting these needs. We also have to remember that we have evolved to a state where it's like, and I struggle with this so much, when I get that fireworks chemistry feeling towards someone, I'm like, I don't care if they don't meet any of my needs. I'll abandon everything. I'll get on a flight to Australia, quit my job, leave my friends behind, leave my family. Like, I honestly was so like that. And I've still definitely got that in me. But you have to kind of go to a place of like, is this really what I want? Is this really going to make me thrive? Because we really look underneath that chemistry and often anxiousness. Is that going to be a progressive place to build a conscious partnership? I'm not saying that you can't have chemistry with someone, but they have to also meet the values that you stand by. So at the moment, communication, I think, is really, really, really key. Someone that everything can be worked on, but someone that just like shuts down or runs when something gets hard is a bit of a red flag for me, and it's something that I've had to work on a lot. I know it's not easy, but it's really tricky to be in a relationship with someone that literally just goes, no, if they're not aware of it and they're not willing to work on it. So that's definitely a big one. And healthy dependency. So the last relationship I was in, I kind of went from one extreme of perhaps being quite needy and quite dependent on my partners, especially in a physical way. And I don't mean in a sexual sense. I mean, like, I'm very tactile. And it's almost like I go back into, and I think a lot of us do, go back into quite like a childlike state of needing parenting, being held and all that kind of stuff. And I went from like being like that to being someone that really didn't like that and was so about autonomy and, independence, and that we didn't rely on each other. And that was interesting as a sort of thing to explore. But ultimately, there needs to be a balance between the two. And you need to be able to depend on each other in a way that's not overly demanding. But it's like the whole point of partnership, to be able to be there for one another, but also support each other on your own journey. So that is definitely a big one. And then I think compatibility. Mark talks quite a lot about love languages, and it's something that I've been looking into a lot. And it's something that people don't, I never really thought about it before, but if you don't communicate, you have to learn each other's love language. You have to be willing to be like, okay, this is how they receive love and this is how they give love. It might not be the way I'm used to. It's great when it just works and it's just there, but sometimes it's like a little bit different from what you're used to. And then something that and I think all of us do it, and it's a whole episode in itself, but the attachment theory stuff is, I have to be mindful of that dynamic whenever I meet someone, you know, is that thing that's drawing me to them because it plays out a anxious, avoidant dynamic that's familiar for me. So those are a couple of things. Yeah.
It's really cool because it does ultimately, being able to say these needs and say what your values are, again, goes back to this like self-worth and not self-abandoning, which again and I've heard you say it before, like the whole Disney thing, that we're just like, we will be saved by the man, so we don't need to put what we actually need out there, or what our non-negotiables are, because it's kind of almost out of our hands, or that's how we're led to believe when we're growing up. So yeah, I think it's so interesting to learn this, and also to learn it with your partner, right? Like if you can get into a relationship where you're learning together, like Mark always talks about how if your partner still has something to teach you, you know, you're still in it.
Totally. And that's the thing, I think when you realize that every relationship that comes your way and everything that happened, it's just teachers, and everyone is an opportunity and you know, an experience where we can learn if we remain open to it. And I think it's crucial to not villainize your, you know, partner, ex, whatever experience, because I think that negates what was shared, what was like, you know, whether that was love or passion or whatever, or the lessons. And also it's disempowering.
Yeah, and really taking responsibility for stuff. I learned that through one of my mentors. I don't know if you know her, Emma Cannon. She's like a fertility expert, and she helped me when I was thinking about going through IVF, and I lost my period for a while. And something she told me was curiosity, compassion, and responsibility. Like when you react, get curious, be compassionate towards yourself for how you react, even if you like have a hissy fit, and then take responsibility for how you can change the situation. Even if you're like blaming and putting it all on someone else, how can you take that responsibility?
Absolutely.
Leading on more to back to Mark Groves, I've learned so much about kind of my stepping stone with him was all about boundaries, and then that led me to codependency.
I was just about to say, bring up boundaries. Yeah, let's do it.
Let's bring up the boundaries. Have you had any like real like aha moments with your boundary work and putting in those boundaries, and how difficult has that been for you?
So hard. And not just in a romantic sense, just in life, just setting boundaries in life. And definitely in work, being able to put those boundaries in place, and just being so concerned that if you set a boundary, you're going to upset someone or lose someone. And I think that's why we don't do it, because we think, well, if I set a boundary there, I'm going to upset them, or, you know, I'm going to cause a conflict, and I don't want any conflict, so I'll just keep going. But it's a very particular kind of feeling when, you know, your boundaries either aren't in place or they're being overstepped, and you begin to feel bitter, resentful. You can't thrive to your best ability, but ultimately you're angry. You'll be angry at other people, but you're actually angry at yourself because you're not, you know, doing it. And so that work is, and it's interesting because the podcast has always informed my life as it happens. And someone actually sent me a message yesterday on Instagram that just really summed it up. She was like, when you kind of want to find it, but she's like, when you like do it, we do it. And I always try and remember as I'm speaking these things, like I have to embody it, and the lessons will always come along, and they're always like, it's one thing intellectualizing it, and then it happens and you're like, oh, this is actually really fucking hard. But the boundary, well, I learned something really, really amazing from one of my mentors, who, because I think within my family as well, they're all quite tough, and I then associate boundaries as being really aggressive, or being like, if you need to set a boundary, let's say in work, and sending a really cutting email that's all, a bit scary and just can intensify the situation in a bad way. And he taught me, he was like, people can't mess with the truth. And within that, what he meant was, if it's true for you and you can communicate that, it's not about you taking away the other person's experience, because they're going to be having their own, but just to be like, this is what I feel and this is what I need to own, and I respect that you will have another truth. And Mark always talks about this. It's like, you have to make space for there to be two truths in a situation. It's not about who's right or wrong. It's just like, this is what I need to do for me, and I really hope that you can respect that. So if you apply that to a relationship, it's like, you don't have to be confrontational with it. You don't need, and boundaries don't always need to be communicated in the way that we think. Like, some people are like, oh, I'm going to cut them off and I'm going to tell them. I'm like, no, that's not setting a boundary necessarily. That's actually looking for a response. And so you really need to check in with yourself that it's coming from a true, authentic place, not to get a reaction from someone. And they're a lot quieter in that sense. You don't need to, like I say, you've got to set them almost internally first before you try and communicate them to the world, because you need to be able to set it and be okay with people leaving your life if they can't respect it or meet it. And I think that's the terrifying thing, is that we're so willing to abandon ourselves to keep someone in. But if you're keeping them on the wrong terms, like, that, it's not good for you and it's not good for them. And that brings me to one of my favorite quotes. I think it's Elizabeth Gilbert. And I keep reminding myself of it at the moment. It's like, there's no such thing as one-way liberation. And if you again, you can apply that to relationships. If someone breaks up with you and you're heartbroken and stuff, like, if it's liberating for them and freeing for them, it might not feel it at the time, but it will be for you. And you just have to trust the unfolding of that. If you lose a job, your life suddenly takes on a complete different course and you feel lost, like, and it's liberating for the other people involved. It will be liberating for you. And I try and live my life, especially at the moment, on those principles. And I really believe it to be so, because if it's feeling stuck and stagnant from one party, the likelihood is it is from the other one. They might not have the awareness around it yet.
Yeah, so you put that so beautifully. I really I really love everything you've said around boundaries, and something that that also I thought about during your solo episode around breakups was on a different path, but to do with victimhood. And I think this is something that we can so easily do when we haven't done the work and we haven't got the awareness. We so quickly go into, why do bad things always happen to me? And
then it just perpetuates the issue.
Yeah. And again, it's like putting, like what we were saying about putting yourself back into that control by taking the responsibility. But did you have like a moment, was that through a particular relationship, or a particular moment where you realized that you were playing that victim? Yeah.
There are a couple of moments looking back. One, I went to this retreat when I was probably at, I guess, a bit of a rock bottom. I'd come back from LA. I was really unsure of who I was, what my path was. And I got invited on this retreat that was quite an intense spiritual deep dive. It wasn't like a glamorous kind of yoga green juice. It was like let's look at your childhood trauma and like work through it. And at the beginning, I was like, I do not need to be here. I do not want to be here. Tried to pretty much escape. And then I stayed, and there were like a lot of aha moments there. But one was, we had to do this thing, which was like go a timeline of our life and go through people that had been significant. And that could be from, a 5-year relationship to a postman you had an interaction with. It was like whatever came up and felt significant for you. And as we journaled around these people and these things, we had to answer a set of questions. And one of the questions was, what part did you play in this? And I honestly couldn't understand the question. I remember going to my friend or the teachers, and I was like, I don't get it. I couldn't get my head around that I may have played a part in the demise of anything or been responsible for anything. Like, responsibility was a huge theme in my Saturn Returns journey. So that was one of the things that, looking back, I was like, wow, I didn't even compute that question. And the second one was, even at the end, when we had to speak about what we'd experienced, I felt before that the universe was like, or everything was against me. What shifted was I said, it's happening around me, but I didn't say it's happening for me. It was like, I was in like protection mode, you know? I was like, everything's chaos, but now I have a bubble. And that was interesting looking back, because now I'm like, everything's happening for me. Even when things go wrong, me and my best friend will be like, just say thank you. I'm like, thank you. And then the quicker you flow with it, the more you're like, okay, I get it. Because ultimately we can't grow without pain. We need it. We need these experiences to cultivate and mold ourselves in the versions we're supposed to be. If everything was just easy and straightforward, like, we wouldn't become anything interesting. We wouldn't transform into like the butterflies we're supposed to be. It is, I always say that the pain is the knife that sculpts the clay. It's like, otherwise we're just, formless. And so I think once I started realizing that even the bad experiences are beautiful, and to appreciate them, and also to be appreciative of pain, of feeling very deeply. It's something that I think in our society we've become immune to, like, handling it. We don't really, especially with social media, it creates this warped version of reality that everything has to be pretty and perfect. And I think that is really problematic. And then there was another thing I wanted to touch on. Oh yeah. And then it was the breakup. So the big breakup at the end of my Saturn return it could have easily put me into like, I'm a victim, this has happened to me. And I never really felt that, which was interesting, because I think I'd been doing a lot of work, and then suddenly I realized I had an opportunity to put it into practice. And that was really paradoxically empowering for me, because I was like, even though that happened, I don't feel victimized by the situation. I can see that this is someone that's going through something in his own journey, and this isn't actually to do with me. And I don't need to villainize him in order to validate what I'm feeling. We both are experiencing pain, and one doesn't nullify the other. And I think that is also an empowering thing, to be able, like, it's, holding space for each other, even in the demise. It's not always possible, but now, without going into too much detail, there's a beautiful friendship 2 years later that's been able to come out of it. And I think that is because I didn't go into that victimhood state.
Yeah, so powerful. And I think the other thing with being in those moments, as you said, about like being in pain, is not feeling like we have to fix it. Like knowing that, as you said, like the universe it's got its own plan, and we're just a part of that. And again, being thankful. And it reminds me of like Lacey Phillips, and because I know you did a great podcast with her as well. Like, just,
yeah, I love Lacey.
She's so great. I'm just actually starting a lot of to kind of dive deep into her stuff, but I try and have that kind of affirmation of what is meant for me will not miss me. And I think that it's just such a good way to to stop striving all the time for this happiness. I think people think as well, when we talk about like the work, it's like you've literally got to sit down, pen to paper, and be journaling all the time and be doing all these courses, and actually just letting go. And
totally. I feel like sometimes people can become like addicted to that, but it's a control piece. And it's really as simple as like tapping into your body. Like, does this feel in alignment? No. Okay, let's change course. Does this? Yes. Okay, let's keep going. It's like a constant, we have our own internal navigation system. It's just becoming aware and tapped into it. And things are going to happen when you're like, oh, that felt really icky. I wish I didn't do that. And just go, okay, great. What have I learned? How have I changed? Why didn't that work for me? And like, how can we adapt and move on going forward?
I think this leads me on really nicely to like, what are the kind of daily practices that you have, or regular practices you have, that allows you to put the work in?
Yeah, people, it's such a personal thing, that I'm like mindful of not wanting to prescribe too many things. I think in my breakup solo episode, I'm a big believer in journaling, but I'm not that, I'm not doing it every day, but I do it for things like, it just creates a lot of synchronicity because, for instance, I just moved into a new place. And initially when I moved in, I had a complete freak out. I felt very overwhelmed. I had this thing of, I need to remain small. I've moved into somewhere that's too big. I don't have a partner. I feel like I should. All these fears and like irrational things were coming up. And I opened one of my many, many journals, and it opened to a page which said my dream home. And I was like, what's this? And I'd written it probably a year ago. And it was describing the space in, literally the wood floors it had, the ceilings, the balcony. But it was also describing like what it was going to signify for me in terms of the version of myself that I was going into. And as soon as I read it, I was like, oh, I'm here. This is okay. This is like safe. This is where I'm supposed to be. So it can act as like these amazing reminders, because we forget and we get so stuck in our neuroses that we're like panicking. So it's quite nice to go back to, not only to see how far we've come, but also to remember what we were desiring at that time, because we're all guilty of getting those things and then being like, but I want more, and not actually appreciating what we've achieved or how far we've come. So I just think they're a beautiful thing to keep for life, because it's an opportunity to go back into a library of all the versions of ourselves we've ever been. So I literally have them it was a very innate thing in me. I started from a very young age, and I've kept them all. I mean, if anyone ever found them, they think I was completely insane. So I think, writing in whatever way feels truthful for you. I love walking. Walking for me is great, getting out in nature and moving stuff out of our body. And that can be, sometimes like I go to this place, just this, cheap place where I go and get a massage, but there's something about the people there that I feel very held in that moment to be able to completely come undone. And I think that that's really important, especially in the society we're living in, where we're expected to have everything together, have our jobs, have our relationships, have our friendships, be like bossing it, and all these different, we need to be able to have a space where we can come undone, whether that's in a friendship, or in a massage parlor. I'm very like, I'm a homebody. I'm a Taurus through and through in that sense. And I'm also my human design. I can't remember whether I'm a manifesting generator, but it basically, when I did that, I was like, that makes so much sense. I need a lot of downtime, a lot of chill time in order to get the most out of myself. And I think, again, that's something within our society, that it's like 9 to 5, you have to be going all through the day. And if you're not, you're failing. Whereas I think just sitting with ourselves, and that's something that people find tremendously uncomfortable, just being able to, I'll often just like lie on the sofa and I'll put on either Abraham Hicks or just like some sort of spiritual music, and just lie there doing nothing. It's great because
So good.
I just can sit with myself. And I think that that's something that's really undervalued, because when we can't sit with ourselves, we will constantly be seeking validation, approval, need to be out because we're afraid of what might come up. But once you kind of face that stuff and realize that you have got you've got your own back, it's a pretty cool place to be.
Yeah, and as you said, so like undervalued, that time just to be, rather than feeling like we have to achieve or be productive, just being able to sit, I think is so much value. But and that's been a huge journey of mine. Like I'm only just getting comfortable with it. And kind of like, I'd love to wrap this up with more of like it's just a question, actually. It's just interesting for me because so I love playing the guitar and singing, and I'm not great at it. And I know you do it to a much more like professional level, but where are you at with that? And are you doing it for you, or are you doing it to share with other people?
It's very interesting that you ask that, because it's one of those things that I rationalize it in my head and I reason with myself that perhaps it's not for me and, I shouldn't do it. But I have it's a very innate calling that comes from somewhere on a soul level. But I have so many internal and psychological obstacles with it that I'm still trying to navigate. But I think it's going to be a big part of the next series of the podcast, because I know that in some way is going to create a roadmap for me to express it in the need that I need, in the way that I am supposed to express it. I think I just need to, I'm taking the steps, and I actually just went and did a project away. No, I didn't tell anyone that I was going to do it, and just wrote solidly for 10 days with someone. And it was incredible because it lights me up in a way it's hard to explain. But I think what's really important with this kind of creative stuff is that we all should be, I don't want to say all should be doing something creative, because not all of us are wired that way. But if we have an innate desire to do it, we do owe it to ourselves to express that, because it's very cathartic, it's very medicinal. And I think we've all sort of we lose touch with that as we become adults. Children play without it needing to be their vocation, whereas I'm like, well, I can only do it if I'm going to be the next, so and so. And actually, it would be a more beautiful world if we were all just more expressive with our creativity, without it needing to be something, without it needing to be the way we earn money or whatever, just as a thing that we do because it's part of who we are. So I'm trying to get more into that. I think it was challenging for me because it's been such an innate desire. And yet when I started doing it on a more professional level, I found that sometimes the press would say like, oh, she's trying to be a pop star. And that's really not what it is for me. But I think, again, I just have to separate my own ego from being concerned about the response and just do it. But it's a theme that I've noticed amongst all my guests in varying degrees, is that the thing that they hold closest to them is usually the thing they stop themselves from doing. The thing that really, and I'm talking about people that are super successful that you would know, that have something that they don't share with the world that they really wanted to do, because we have the most resistance around the things we love the most.
It feels the most scary.
It's the most vulnerable, because the risk is greater. But on the precipice of anything great, fear is our gatekeeper. We can't get around that. So I'm still trying to get around it, but realizing that actually, the only way is through. And I think that I need to create the infrastructure, and I am doing that at the moment, of community and opportunities that I'm like, okay, let's do this now. Let's put this out there. So here is me holding myself accountable to putting music out into the world soon.
I love that. And I feel like that's a perfect way to end.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.